Everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is part 3 in the meditation series, and this one's relatively unique because it's going to be focusing on a single kind of meditation. Or is it? So it's a little complicated because this is about Vipassana. And in modern times, Vipassana is largely regarded as sort of a standalone meditation practice. But if you look at the suttas, it sort of goes hand in hand with other things. So Vipassana itself means super seeing. So like paravision would be like the Western equivalent, or supervision or something to that effect. But again, traditionally, it was always combined with samatha, which means calmness, mental clarity, and in addition to sati or mindfulness, which is incidentally something that we're going to be covering more of down the road. So, how exactly did it come to be separate, and how exactly does somebody go about engaging in Vipassana? Well, this goes hand in hand with what I was talking about before about mindfulness, because initially it starts off expressly as a form of very specific mindfulness, uh, essentially watching the breath. It's often called that. And that doesn't mean looking at the air leaving your body. Um, Really, it just means that you pay attention to one thing that happens to be pretty uniform, for lack of a better word, something that's always in the background. And it, incidentally, the one of the best things there, as long as you're alive, you're going to be breathing. And paying attention to breathing is really interesting because even as I'm talking about this to you right now, you're probably all of a sudden aware that you're breathing. Before I mentioned it, you were, just on autopilot when it came to breathing. But now you're paying attention to it. So by watching the breath, you are immediately in a state of hyper mindfulness because you're paying attention to one thing really closely. But as I mentioned, breathing sort of goes on autopilot after a while when you stop thinking about it. So by watching your breath, you're in a state of, I would call hyper mindfulness on the breathing itself. And then as that sort of fades, as that mindfulness fades, what ends up happening is insight, which also in turn, and this is something I can personally vouch for, in turn, what happens is what's called jhana. And jhana is flipping awesome. It's one of the best reasons to meditate, to be honest, which paradoxically, if you chase it, you're not going to get it. It only happens when mindfulness sort of fades and everything else does too. So, what happens initially is you sort of stop existing in the most characteristic sense. Um, and ultimately, you feel an intense sensation of joy uh, for no reason. It's the only thing I can compare it to is it's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster, except without the intensity. It's like just a sudden climbing joy. Now, I have not gotten to the point where even that fades, and the only thing that's left is a kind of contentment or equanimity. In fact, I haven't even got to the point where the joy disappears, and so that's something I'm currently working on. But it's one of the most rewarding forms of meditation because of that. And that's not to say that jhana or feelings of contentment and joy can't happen with other forms. It's just Vipassana really seems to focus on attaining that. And of course, the bliss that's felt isn't the end game. The end game is actually the cessation of even that, and not really having an intense attachment to happiness or sadness, but utter equanimity. But that's a long term goal and pretty dang hard to attain. But ultimately, Vipassana is unique because it takes one very, very simple thing, watching the breath, and it turns it into something akin to an art form, I would argue, in the sense of art as a creative endeavor. I just mean in the sense that it's incredibly simple. I mean, you're literally you're paying attention to the sensation of air against your nostrils or in your lungs or against your esophagus. One thing. You're paying attention to one thing, one very minor sensation. Um, and yet, it takes a long time to get really good at it. It's kind of like, toddlers learn how to walk, but how many of those toddlers grow up to be, world class Olympic runners? It's the same thing, really, if you think about it, what that toddler is learning. It's just those guys who are the Olympic runners, they've really specialized and gotten really, really good at it. Well, similarly, Vipassana takes quite a bit of practice to ultimately get to the states that its end game is intended for. That being said, I think it's one of the easiest meditations to get into, kind of like, again, being a toddler learning how to walk. And really, the only thing that is required of it is time and commitment. Engaging in Vipassana regularly will make you good at it. It's not a question of, learning some secret technique or some perfect time of the day or anything like that. In fact, I would argue that Vipassana is probably the only kind of meditation that really doesn't require any kind of attentiveness to when you engage in it. Most forms of meditation are either invigorating and as such should be done in the morning, or calming and as such should be done at night. But Vipassana is one of those things where I think it's kind of like a shower. If you're sleepy, a shower will wake you up, and if you're wired, a shower will calm you down. So it's kind of like that. Highly recommend it as an entry form of meditation. And also, as I mentioned in previous videos, even still, it's not one of those things I think you should look up on YouTube. It's one of those things where you should have somebody who does know how to do that and instruct you properly. Because just like with lifting weights or any kind of endeavor that requires a complicated set of movements, and in this case, those movements are neurological, not mechanical, you still need to get it right. Otherwise, you're just going to increase the error. Yeah, that's very important in meditation. Any kind of physical act, if you think about it, if you're doing it wrong and you repeat doing it wrong, all you're doing is making the wrong part harder to correct. Similarly with meditation, if you keep doing it wrong, you're going to make the hard effort for have reverse benefits. You're going to actually increase the margin of error for yourself. So, but yeah, I think that really covers Vipassana for the most part. I kind of wanted to get into like how they came to be separate, but in my opinion, I think what changed isn't really that that Samatha and Sati and Vipassana got separated so much as I think the way we perceive those aspects of the meditation got separated. I still think that calmness and mindfulness are factors in Vipassana. It's just we don't look at it that way. We sort of we turned Vipassana into an umbrella, and all the parts that were incorporated into that umbrella just became Vipassana. That's what I think. I'm sure there are people who know better on that, though. Actually, I'm sure. I'm 100% sure. I'm really not a scholar as far as the history and development and any kind of changes that may have happened to Vipassana over the centuries, maybe millennia. That's assuming they were the same for many millennia. But anyway, that's Vippassana, and then next week's gonna be about all forms of mantra-related meditation. So don't miss that one. Like, share, subscribe. Keep asking questions. Bye.